I would like to have her introduce herself because she has a good story to tell. But I would like to introduce you to Veronica Butcher.
Thank you, Kathy. Thank you all for having me. I was excited when I got the email from Kathy earlier this summer about the opportunity to come and talk to you all. I am a native of Western North Carolina. I grew up in a small community outside of Asheville. It's a very poor farming community. Grew up without very little and have throughout my life been very blessed to be put in situations that have led me on a path to becoming a political appointee and understanding how government process works. In high school, I served on the Asheville County Youth Council and got bit by the civic engagement bug. And ever since then, it's been a passion of mine to be involved in what's going on in government and helping other people understand what's going on in government and how they have a role and how to figure out what their role can be in the process. I have over 17 years of experience working with nonprofit advocacy groups here in North Carolina and also on the national level. And I was fortunate enough to be appointed to serve in Governor Perdue's administration for a number of years, after which I came out with a completely different perspective on advocacy and what works and what didn't work. I saw a lot of wasted resources, wasted time, and inappropriate asks being made. What I mean by that is coming to the governor's office for something the governor can't do because it's actually something that goes on at the federal level. So I started my consulting firm when my son was 7 months old. I think you all saw him here. He's down playing tonight. So I wanted to be able to work from home and have a lifestyle that was conducive to being a mom, because a lot of my career, it's been nonstop work, 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 work. It was not very healthy. So now I get to do what I love and also be the kind of mom I want to be and bring him along with me to a lot of things. But my consulting firm, I started with the intention of being really clear that I want folks to think about the purple lane. And what do I mean by the purple lane? On election day, when you look at the maps that they splash across on the news media, they've got the reds and the blues and the reds and the blues, and people are wearing the reds and the blues to identify with the sides. But when you zoom in on the county level, a lot of those colors are actually different shades of purple. So this is why my logo are a red and a blue fading to purple, because at the end of the day, most of us are purple. Not one person agrees with another person 100% on any of the issues. There's too many issues. And we all come from different backgrounds and experiences that inform how we think and believe. But at the end of the day, it doesn't matter who you talk to. Most people will say they want clean air to breathe, they want clean water to drink, they want land for their kids to play on or to have recreation, whether that's hunting and fishing or sporting, whatever that is. Where we get crossways with each other is how to make sure we always have clean air, clean water, and places for recreation and our kids to run around. I really think that as environmental advocates, it's our number one job to make sure we're staying in the purple lane when we're doing this work and when we're talking to people in our everyday life. Things aren't going to shift and change by going to another rally in DC. They're not going to shift and change by signing another petition and you're sending an email. They're going to change by sitting down at people's kitchen tables and having one-on-one conversations about where they're at and where they're coming from. But starting from a place of love and understanding of that, we all care about our health. We all care about our kids' health. And we want to live healthy lives. No one wants to see anyone get sick. So what's happened, I think, over the last few years is with this polarization in the media especially, and I think made worse by social media, allowing you to filter your news channels to reinforce whatever it is that you want to hear or reinforce that you already believe, is we've lost that kitchen table moment. And we're not all reading the same news. So you don't know where somebody's coming from when you're talking to them about an issue. You could walk up to somebody and say, oh my gosh, did you see that article yesterday about the sky turned purple? And they're like, no, but I saw this article over here. It said the sky was green. When I was growing up, my grandfather, he spent the week clipping the newspaper. And he had a brown accordion folder that sat next to his recliner in the living room. And every Sunday, the whole family would come over for Sunday dinner after church. And he would hold court in the living room. All my aunts and uncles and us kids were running in and out and everything, and he's got it organized by category, health or, jobs, whatever it was. And he's pulling out the articles of the week, making sure everybody knew, and did you see this one here and that, and, and he got to be a real health nut later in life. He suffered some strokes and really got into clipping those types of articles. But that was, that was social media back then, right? That's what I grew up with. It's so different now. People aren't sharing information like that anymore, or in depth like that anymore. No one actually clicks and reads all these articles online. So we don't know where everyone's starting from. So what I want to encourage you all to keep in mind as you start this 4-week journey on advocacy and environment is to put yourself in the other person's position, whether that's a family member or a friend or an elected official who may not be where you want them to be on that issue. And come from a place of love and understanding and try to find that common ground, because it's there. And oftentimes what happens is we open our mouths too fast and we come across as judgy, and it automatically shuts the other person down, that they're not going to listen to me. And I'll conclude by saying, one of the reasons why I'm really passionate about this is a hopeful moment in our country to be able to bring together red and blue and bring the environment into the purple lane is because for the last 2 years, I've been working nationally with moms across the country and their kids on reducing air pollution as a way to protect children's health, but also address climate change. And I am working side by side and walking the halls of Congress side by side with evangelical Christian conservative moms and their kids. Some of the most amazing women, strong, just passionate about what they're doing. And oftentimes hearing from them their reflections of what it's been like for them to try to do this work and not being welcomed at an event or not being received well by an environmental organization, or the fear, this really struck me by a mom friend of mine, the fear of being labeled a liberal hippie if she showed up to like a Sierra Club meeting. We've got to do a better job than that. We cannot solve these problems in our world unless we create an open table for everyone. So that's my story. That's why I love coming and talking to groups, and so excited Kathy asked me to be here today. And I'm going to jump now into the presentation, and the orange squares that my son went around and gave each of you are for if you have questions while I'm talking. There's pens here Allie can send around if you need a pen. I'm going to go through the whole presentation and then I'll stop for questions, and like I said at the beginning, it's a short presentation. So how many of you know who actually holds the power to represent you? By show of hands, do you know who your elected officials are in Congress?
At the state or federal level?
Federal, in Congress. Federal, okay. Do you know who represents you on the state level? Okay. City?
Yeah. Well, I mean, the city council, but...
Yeah, but who in your district?
Yeah.
County.
County commissioners? Okay. And what about local boards or commissions? The folks on who's deciding about your parks and water? Okay. So there's a lot of people who make decisions every single day that impact your life. And do you know, out of all of those I just went through and listed, which one of those categories, federal, state, or local, or county, city or county, which one of those is making the most decisions that impact your everyday life? Throw it out.
County.
County?
County.
County. Yes! Oh my God, I'm the first group to get it right! Yay, that's awesome. Yes, the county commissioners. A lot of people don't know that. I've done this presentation a ton of times, and most often people say federal, and the second most often is state. So 2 thumbs up for that. So on the federal level, the legislative branch of government is Congress, which is a bicameral government, which means the Congress is divided into 2 chambers, the Senate and the House of Representatives. And each state in the United States elects only 2 senators for a staggered 6-year terms. The senators represent the whole state, And for the House of Representatives nationwide, the U.S. is divided into 435 congressional districts, each with a population of about 710,000 people. Anybody know how many districts we have here in North Carolina?
12.
13.
Winner, 13, yes. And they are the subject of a hotly contested Supreme Court case on gerrymandering, to keep an eye out that they may have to redo those maps in addition to the ones that they're redoing right now. And so each state in the nation has a different government structure and cycle, but they all have the same three branches of government: the executive, judicial, and legislative branches. And today our focus is going to be on the North Carolina legislative branch of government. So who can tell me who holds the power, the most power in the state of North Carolina right now?
Not the governor.
Chairman of the Senate or whatever. Burger.
Yes. So because the Senate has what's called a veto-proof, well, the General Assembly has a veto-proof supermajority, that makes the Senate President Pro Tem, Phil Berger, the most powerful man in the state of North Carolina, because he wields enough power to overturn any of the governor's vetoes, for the most part. There are a couple of bills that they passed that are in what's called the veto garage right now that will probably stay there because they were so controversial. But he also has so much power because he appoints everyone to their committees within the legislature, and then he also can influence whether or not a bill moves forward or if it dies. So in North Carolina, let's see. So we have the bicameral government, just like Congress on the federal level. So we've got the two chambers, the Senate and the House, and all of the seats are up for election next fall. So I encourage you all to pay attention. So the House of Representatives on the federal level and the North Carolina General Assembly, every 2 years, they're up for election. So that means they're always running for a re-election, where members of Congress and the Senate have a 6-year term. It's a little bit longer. So with the supermajority is because the Republicans control 3/5 of the voting members of the legislature and have the power to overturn any of the votes of the governor. So with the supermajority, as long as they hold the supermajority, Phil Berger will be the most powerful person. So what we're going to do now is we're going to take a deeper dive into each chamber of the legislature and first talk about the Senate. The lieutenant governor is the president of the Senate, but he actually has very limited powers and only can vote to break a tie. And with the Senate really in the control of Phil Berger, really the lieutenant governor just kind of shows up for what we like to call glamour detail. And the Senate is considered the most powerful of the two chambers. The House is led by Speaker Tim Moore, who is actually considered to be a little bit more moderate and more approachable than Senator Berger, and has actually been fairly good on energy issues over the years. Each chamber, the Senate and the House, has its own set of committee and caucuses. And if you're not familiar with what a committee or a caucus is, committee is a part of the actual legislative process, and those are public meetings. They have to put them out to public notice and advertise them. The public can attend and the public can make comments, typically. Now, I will add the caveat that they oftentimes have a sign-up sheet, or you get a limited amount of time, and they don't always make it easy for people to make public comments. And I'll talk more about committees later in the presentation. Now, a caucus is a group of people with similar beliefs. So there's a sportsman's caucus, there's the black caucus, there's an agricultural caucus, and then each party has their own caucus. These are not public. These are not meetings that they have to advertise. This is where they go behind closed doors and they hash out their differences and try to get on the same page before they go into a committee vote or go onto the floor for a vote. So this is an overview of the legislature's cycle. And as we discussed before, it lasts for a biennium, which is 2 years. The first part, or what we call the regular session, is more commonly referred to as the long session and occurs in years ending in an odd number, which is what we're in right now. So 2017, we had the long session. So we started the legislative cycle in North Carolina this past January. During the legislative session, meetings are held on Monday evenings and during the day, Tuesday, Wednesdays, and Thursdays. They typically do not hold session on Friday unless they're running really, really over. Most legislators return to their districts on the weekend to work or meet with constituents and spend time with family. And there's no limit on any length of any session. The long session typically lasts 6 months. So typically we'll wrap up by August. They try to say they're going to get out by July 1st because that's the budget deadline, but they very rarely actually make that deadline. They have been known a time or two in their history to go all the way through past November. So in the short session, it lasts only just a couple months, which we'll go into more detail. Let's take a deeper look at the long session here. The first part of the long session is the only time during the whole 2-year cycle that you can introduce a new law, repeal an existing law, or make changes to a current law. Let me say that again. It's the only time you can introduce a new law, repeal an existing law, or make changes to a current law. Those are called substantive changes to legislation. And those can only happen during the beginning of the long session, be introduced in bill form. The rest of the cycle, there's criteria that a bill has to meet in order to be introduced. So what you see is at the very beginning of the long session, during the January to April timeframe, is a frenzy of bills being introduced. The news media, that's all you hear about every night. Your email boxes are going crazy by advocacy groups emailing you, this bill, this bill, this bill, get down to the General Assembly, and then it dies off because the bill filing deadlines drop off, and we know what we're looking at essentially for the next 2 years. There are, of course, ways to get around this. If a bill has what's called a fiscal impact or a budget impact, it involves money, that bill can still be introduced. A bill can be recommended by a legislative committee or commission, like the Environmental Review Commission, which meets in between sessions. Or you often see this happen more and more. It's called a PCS, a Preferred Committee Substitute. And this is when a committee votes to strip the language out of an existing bill that's already been moving through the process, totally delete the text, put brand new text in, and then let it continue through the process without having to start over again. This is a way to shortcut the system.
Does it have to follow the same topic?
No, it does not at all. So this happened to the coal. This is how they got the coal ash bill in a couple years ago, was they did a PCS. So how does a bill become a law? A bill can begin its journey in either chamber, the House or the Senate. And once a bill has been filed, it's considered formally introduced into the chamber. We're going to start in the Senate for our purposes, and let's say it's been read into that chamber for the first reading, and it's going to be referred to a committee. It happens really fast at the beginning of the session. It's basically a formality, and it's this man up at the front with a microphone who's literally reading the bill names and numbers right in a row, and the speaker or the whoever's running the Senate for the day will name a committee, and it's just like that. There's no discussion or debate, just goes to a committee. Super quick. So once a committee, bills move through more than one committee oftentimes for approval, and sometimes the process can take months, sometimes it can take hours with this General Assembly, just depends. A committee can choose to not take up a bill, or it can ask for a bill to be re-referred to another committee. And if it's not considered by the committee and doesn't pass by a vote of that committee before the session is adjourned, then it's considered dead for that legislative cycle. And there is a committee called the Rules Committee that's often known that if a bill gets sent there, it's like the graveyard for bills. So if it's read in on the first reading and gets sent to Rules Committee, then you know the leadership of the General Assembly has already determined that bill's not gonna move that session. So, oh, I'm behind on my slides, sorry about that. Am I skipping around here? No, there we go. So once the bill passes out of the first chamber, either the House or the Senate, it's met a requirement called the crossover deadline. Does anybody know what the crossover deadline is here? The date moves, But this is the date, it's typically in May or April sometimes, into April. So it's within about 6 weeks of the bill filing deadlines typically. And this is when you have to have your bill make it out of the Senate and cross over into the House, or from the House into the Senate by that date, or it's considered dead for the rest of the whole 2-year cycle. So the crossover deadline only occurs during the long session, not the short session. And the only way to get a bill introduced after this is, like we just discussed, a shortcut of a PCS, or if it comes out of committee, or if it is referred, has a budget impact. So now our bill has to go through the same process it went through in the previous chamber if it met crossover deadline. So it goes through the same committee's votes and readings that it did in the first chamber, and if it undergoes a lot of changes, then it will have to go to something called a conference committee. Now, conference committees are usually made up of just a handful of elected officials, usually about 5 or 6, depending on the bill. There could be more than that. And not all of them usually end up making the meeting. Sometimes the meetings don't even get called or occur. And the conference committee hashes out the differences between the two versions of the bill. So if the Senate has a bill that looks completely different than what the House originally introduced, they'll go behind closed doors, they'll try to work it out, and they'll come out with what's called a conference report. And that is the bill that will go back to each floor for a vote and then be decided. So sometimes you have just a handful of legislators actually deciding the language of bills instead of the larger committee process. So once a bill moves out of both of the houses and is approved, it's signed by the governor, it's considered ratified. And the bill, if it's a local law, now I don't know if you all know this, but in North Carolina, local governments exist at the leisure of the state legislature and have to have every little thing approved by the legislature. So there's a ton of local bills that flood the General Assembly every year, and local laws typically take effect immediately. And some bills will have the effective dates written into them. So after adjournment of the General Assembly, the governor has 30 days to act on bills. He can either sign the bill into law, choose not to sign it, which is a way of saying, I don't like this bill, so I'm not gonna endorse it with my signature, but I'm gonna let it become law. Or he can veto it. And like we talked about before, the General Assembly would need 3/5 of the present and voting members of the General Assembly to overturn that veto. So, as you can see, the numerous deadlines from February to May of the long session are why you see that frenzy, right? And then all of a sudden it just kind of drops off over the summer and gets a nice quiet lull, because they typically are adjourned by August. Now this year, because of the gerrymandering lawsuits, we've already had a special session in August, and they're coming back again in October. They aren't typically in session in August and October during the long session, which is what we're during this part of the cycle. So technically, we are right now done with the long session in North Carolina, and we're in between sessions.
Are both houses coming back, Senate and House?
Yes, they will both have to come back. So this means elected officials are home in their districts. This, in my opinion, is the best time for you all to do your advocacy work. When they're home, when they're not having to run over to Raleigh, y'all are close enough. There's people in the mountains that this really rings true. I really, try to stress that you don't have to come down to Raleigh during session to talk to your elected officials or wait to email them or call them. The best time to do it is in between session, when they're not distracted by whatever's going on in the chambers and they're home And you can sit down and have a conversation with them and educate them and listen to what they have to say. I think a lot of times people don't actually take the time to ask questions to the elected officials to get a sense of where they're at on a bill or an issue, or why they think and feel the way they do. So I encourage you all to take this time right now while they're home to meet with them as much as you can. So one last note on the bills, which made the crossover deadline I mentioned. If they didn't pass out of a committee, if they made the crossover deadline but didn't pass out of the committee before they adjourned the long session, they're still considered alive and they can come up in the short session. So what are they doing between sessions other than going back to their jobs? All of them are part-time legislators. They get paid very little money. Most of them, unless they have family money, have jobs, full-time, most of the time, jobs. And they're also still doing committee work in between. So there's the, like I mentioned, Environmental Review Commission will be meeting between now and next May, taking on a variety of different environmental issues, and whatever recommendations they come up with or suggestions they come up with can be turned into bills to be introduced in the next session. So finally, the last part of the General Assembly cycle is the short session, which starts in May of 2018. And this is typically a 6-week session, and is typically just to work on the budget, to adjust it if there's any adjustments that need to be made ahead of the fiscal year starting on July 1st. During the short session, they also consider the committee recommendations, that committees and commissions that were meeting during that break, and they take up any bills that are still alive that had met the crossover deadline. So again, there's even shorter amount of time to get to your elected officials when they're in Raleigh during the short session. So when you think about it, this May to June to July timeframe of starting advocacy efforts when they're in session, you're already 10 steps behind. So if you can get to them and start that education before they actually hit the halls, you're actually in a better place. I think it's critically important that folks like you focus on that rather than getting frustrated with trying to get a meeting with them in the General Assembly. So, rulemaking, real quick, and then I'm going to take a question. So why am I switching to rules? Anybody know? Anybody have a guess? So rules end up in the legislative process all the time. And it's a funny thing. But they're a central part of the policy process, and in North Carolina they can be created either by boards and commissions, which are appointed by the governor or the legislature, or they can be promulgated by the agency. So Department of Environmental Quality can draft rules. Now, rules address a variety of issues including rights, rates for water, electricity, things like that, and procedures of how we're going to do things. And they have to be published in the register. So I'm going to switch out of here for a second here. I hope this does this. So, their website's doing something funny here. And it didn't switch on the screen. I don't know why I did that. It didn't, Alan, my techie person.
Why don't you hit escape and see if you can get your desktop back? Are you in your PowerPoint? Yeah, so if you can get your desk, there you go. Now you can probably.
Great. Oh, great idea. Okay. So it's kind of hard to see here, but this is the administrative Office of Administrative Hearings. This is where rules get published. And what I want to show you all, because a lot of people don't know this. You come here, and they will have right now. This is actually an old rule. It's already been heard, but you can see what proposed rules are here. You click on them, see what's going on, how you comment on them. You can also see the different processes here. They're right here. We've got the permanent rule process, the temporary rule process, and the emergency rule process. Why do we need so many processes? It can take so long to create a rule that they need to have emergency rule process and temporary process to be able to quickly put rules in place when it's taking so long to get a rule made. And this is why it takes so long. This is the process. I know this is hard to see, but I've got the website. I'll give you all the website, and you can look at this more in depth if you want. So basically, it gets proposed, and these dotted boxes are, it doesn't always have to go through this, depends. If it's a solid box, it has to go through that process. So, it starts with the agency or commission, it gets submitted, published, out for public comment, sometimes a public hearing, sometimes not. And then the agency reviews the fiscal notes. So this goes to the Office of Budget and Management, OSBM. Most people don't realize there's staff that's been up there through multiple administration. They look at every rule going through the state of North Carolina, and they have the ability to stop and send a rule back if it's based on budget impacts. So then it comes down, you adopt the rule, okay, great, rule's adopted, and then it goes here. Rules Review Commission, the RRC. This is an executive branch commission, and within 30 days, it has to go through the rules. Every single rule in the state of North Carolina has to go through this commission to be approved before it can actually become a rule. Now, why am I talking about this? Because of this little box right here. 10 or more persons objected, rule awaiting legislative session. Any 10 people anywhere in North Carolina, for any reason, can object to a rule to the Rules Review Commission, and it will send it into the legislative process we just talked about.
If you have 10.
It just takes 10 people, that's it. This is what happened to the building codes.
We can do it here together.
It's not always a good thing. I worked very long and hard on greening the building codes during the Purdue administration and getting the new energy efficiency code and the HERO code in. And 10 letters of objection. We knew it was going to happen. 10 letters of objections went in. The Building Code Council approved the code, and went to Rules Review Commission. 10 letters went in, sent it into the General Assembly. Next thing you know, we're in the legislative process, and we're having to lobby, and we're having to keep stakeholders together, and all of that. So, if you I wanted to put this in here because it's often left out of conversations about the legislative process. And oftentimes, you're showing up at a public hearing, a group's telling you, like, there's this rule and we need public comments, and this public hearing is over here in this commission, and you're showing up there, and the next thing you know, you're getting an email a couple months later telling you it's in the General Assembly. And then we don't always connect those dots for folks, and I think it's really important to be aware of that. It's also a powerful tool to stop things, if there's rules that you don't like moving through. So, let me hop back into presentation here. Oh, it's gonna make me go all the way back through. Sorry about that. Never jumped out into the internet before. So here are the boards and commissions in North Carolina, the main ones that deal with environmental issues. So as the creation care folks here, these are the ones that you're going to want to educate yourself about. Environmental Management Commission, Governor Cooper just appointed several new people to that commission. It's still predominantly Governor McCrory's appointees. We will not see a shift in the